Does the Bible say anything about current events? It certainly does.
It's our focus to be culturally relevant and to communicate a perspective from the Scriptures.
As Christians, we should have a biblical perspective of the news and be able to share that perspective with others.
Hello, I'm Rob Fields, Executive Director of the Leaders of Faith Foundation and co-host on the show with Pastor Larry Burd. Thank you for joining today's News and Biblical Views. Our desire each week is to discuss some of the current issues in our news feeds or talk about among our friends. We then move towards what faith, truth, and the Scriptures have to say about our topic. Our hope is that you would find it informative, encouraging, and help towards your growth in Jesus. Jesus says that He is the way, the truth, and the life, and there's no better way to explore an issue we're facing and then search the Scriptures to find out hope in Him. You know, the struggles, despair, and pain we see all around us can consume us from the start of the day, and we don't have to settle with the message ending here, but let's continue on the pathway towards a biblical view. Let me ask you a question about church. What do you look for in a church? You ask one person why they attend their particular church, and you get one answer. Talk to another, and you may get another answer. You may be a person who's looking for a church home. What should I be looking for when connecting with a church family? One thing is for sure, you will find a variety of responses, and on today's show, we're going to discuss this topic in further detail. So Larry, this is something very close to our hearts when we're talking about the church and fellowship and having people and being a pastor of it. What are some initial thoughts that come to your mind? Because we do see people that are transitioning from one church to another, post-COVID, some people not even going back to church, and then some people, like, I don't want to say it, but shopping around and kind of that consumer mentality, which we'll be talking about. But what's some thoughts?
Well, I'd like to say a couple things. Number one, Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So we have to remember that it's His church. It's not my church, it's not your church, it's not their church, it's His church. And the second thing I think to be reminded of is that no church is a perfect church. In fact, the family was looking for a perfect church, and they went to this church, and they liked a lot of things about it, but they had some problems. And so finally, they couldn't find the perfect church. So someone said to them, "If you find it, don't join it." They said, "Why not?" He said, "If you do, it'll no longer be perfect."
Yeah.
So yes, he'll build His church, and there's no perfect church.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking again for today's discussion, and we have Pastor Joe Velarde, who is also the lead pastor at Riverbend Church here in the Allentown, Lehigh Valley area. And it's beautiful. We're all putting on our pastoral hats here, so we're hoping that people are going to find it very informative and encouraging too, but also to give some guidance to the discussion. But Joe, it is a delight to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to jump into this conversation with you. Really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I couldn't say it better myself than Pastor Larry said about Jesus is going to build His church. This isn't my church. This isn't somebody else's church. It's His. People often ask me, how do you do when people leave or come, or how does that affect you? And of course it hurts, but you're reminded ultimately it's not mine. They're not mine. Exactly. They belong to Him. And so I think it's an important conversation that we're going to jump into today.
Well said, well said. But tell us just a little bit about yourself and also particularly where you became a follower of Jesus too. We always like to hear that in part of your story.
Yeah, so I actually am from the Atlanta area originally, and I married my college sweetheart who told me about this place, introduced me to this place called the Lehigh Valley. And she, in high school, had been praying for the valley. She wanted to see God work and move in incredible ways, to see a spiritual awakening take place here in the valley. And I didn't know that when we were dating, because I had no thought of moving to the Lehigh Valley, never had been here before until I met her and then met her family. And one of the things that struck me over the time of being here in the valley, as I was getting to know the area, is just this hunger from people to really experience something deeper and more meaningful. And my wife was reminding me, even as I was interacting with people, she says, it's really uncommon that people are opening up to you the way they're opening up to you. And so that began to even stir in me a heart to see God start a church here in the valley to join what he was already doing, because he was already doing a great work, but to join him in seeing a church plant started. And so in 2009, we started Riverbend Community Church. And so grateful to be a part of seeing God's kingdom expand and build. We, again, believe, just like John the Baptist, we're the voice of one, not the only voice. But we're one voice crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. But the other side of that, and really my heart for the church, is really built in my own story, because I grew up in a single parent home. And in that, a lot of my searching and a lot of my desire to find hope and meaning and significance and purpose came from men and women in a variety of places, but a lot of them were youth leaders in the local church. Whether that was youth pastors or youth leaders, they would show up and show me what it meant to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so as they would influence me and impact me, they would start to have these spiritual conversations with me. But it wasn't actually until my senior year, after my senior year of high school, that I made a decision to trust in Jesus, because it scared me to trust in Jesus. It was a scary thought to trust him and to follow after him. But these men and women were so patient with me and praying for me. And then I became a follower of Christ. And 6 months after becoming a follower of Christ, I went up to a Word of Life Bible Institute, which you may be familiar with. And then God heard the desires of my heart and not only allowed me to go there, but and provided a way for that to happen. A businessman actually paid for my schooling. And speak of, again, the local church coming alongside me. But then I met my wife there too. So God's been so good and kind to me, but that's just a little bit about me and who I am.
And Joe, just in back on your wife's comment about, wanting to see God work. Next year I'll be here in the Lehigh Valley 40 years. Wow. And I believe God is moving in unusual ways. Way back in 1991, Leighton Ford came here, Billy Graham's brother-in-law, to do some meetings through Moravian College, and we just had a mighty move of the Spirit of God. And then an organization got started called Share the Power, and that's now 31 years later that we're still a part of that. And I've seen God do amazing things in bringing pastors and leaders together for prayer and fellowship. And several years ago, we had a speaker come to Bright Hope, and he came and he said, I really sense something here that I don't sense in many parts of the country. He said, God is moving here. The unity among the pastors, Christian leaders, parachurch groups coming together. So I believe we're hopefully on the verge of a mighty revival in the Lehigh Valley. So you can tell your wife that I said that.
I will.
In case she doesn't watch your interview. But Joe, I have a question before what is the church question, is how do you get the name Riverbend? Are you near the Riverbend or? Yeah, so we, that name, if you've ever seen the movie Pocahontas, down by the river, no, I'm just kidding. That's not why we named it that. But essentially, when you look at the Lehigh Valley and where we are, there's the Lehigh River. Yep. And the Lehigh River actually bends where we are. So right in the middle of where we are in the Lehigh Valley, it bends, but it's a picture of us being in and for the valley, because we really believe that Jesus cares deeply about his church, but also about those who are not a part of his church yet. Yep. And we really want to be about living for Jesus and loving the valley and the world. But the other part of that is what Jesus promised to give, which is this living water. Amen. Because we believe that people are thirsty. Amen. And we believe he's the only one that can really, truly quench that thirst. Amen. So that's the name. Amen. Riverbend. Often people are like, you're not near Riverbend Road. We didn't know about Riverbend Road when we named it Riverbend, because that's on the other side of the valley. But it leads to a lot of funny conversations. So we're talking about the church and why people choose to go to particular churches. How would you define the church? Yeah, I think that's a really important conversation piece. And so when you think back to what you said about when Jesus said, hey, I'm going to build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That word he used is church, but that's translated to ecclesia. And an ecclesia, when you look at that word and what that means, it's really this called out assembly, this called out group of people that center around the work and the person of Jesus and his ways. And they join him in what it is he wants to do in them, first building their character, the character of Christ, and then joining through
his character development of us into his competencies, which are the ways of Christ. And we use competencies often of what I can accomplish and do, but really the church is meant to stay so connected, as Jesus would talk about in John 15, to abide in Jesus. And as we abide in Jesus, that fruit's going to come. And so we're a group of people who rally around who Jesus is and what he was about and how he did what he did. And we do that not just because we think Jesus is incredible and he was an incredible communicator. Yes, that's all true. But he's the one that said, hey, I'm going to not only build my church, but I'm going to sacrifice myself for it. And not only did he say, I'm going to sacrifice, but I'm going to do something that is never been done and will never be done again, which is come down from heaven, pursue people, die on the cross, be murdered. But then he said, 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the dead.
Amen.
And
What
he
a
did
story.
it. He did it. He did it. It was a historical event, and he showed up to all these eyewitnesses. And you know the story, 1 Corinthians 15. I don't have to go through a whole thing, but yeah, it was really beautiful to think about.
We're got lots more to talk about.
That's
But
right.
At this time, we're going to go for a break. 1 minute, please. Come right back with us.
Today's News and Biblical Views is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to today's News and Biblical Views. My co-host, Rob Fields, and I are interviewing Pastor Joe Velarde. He's the lead pastor at Riverbend Church here in the Lehigh Valley, right here in Allentown. And we are excited to look at this topic, what to look for in a church. What do you look for when you're trying to find the right church? Okay, Rob, you got a question?
Yeah, so, and part of it, sometimes we kind of approach it as what I'm looking for in that consumer mentality, but we got to take a step back, right? I think with looking at it more as being part of the body of Christ, what is my role to play in the church? How would you respond to that, Joe?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so important, and what you hit on is spot on, Rob. I think we don't want to lose sight that this is Jesus' church. And so with that, we want to be kingdom-minded people. So first, we got to make sure we're seeking the right thing, right? Jesus made it clear in Matthew 6 to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, not my rightness, not my way, but what is he about? His business. And all these things will be added unto you. And I think when we understand that we're kingdom citizens, and then we conspire with King Jesus to bring his kingdom down here to the earth, right? As much as we can in this imperfect, broken world, then we recognize I have a unique part to play. And so when you read through the scriptures, it's really clear whether you read through Ephesians 4, whether you read through 1 Corinthians, 11, 12, 13, whether you read Romans, it's very clear that each of us, through the Spirit of God, with indwelling us and leading us, we have a part to play. We have a gift to offer. We have unique experiences. We have not only experiences, but the way in which we see the world that helps us to enhance the expression of Jesus' church. And really, when we do that and we benefit and value the other, what I'm not and what you are, and vice versa, versus being caught up in comparison, we can then celebrate and move towards what it is that Jesus wants me to do within the church, because I can then play my part. I don't have to try to be something I'm not, but just like a football team, right? I love football. I love this time of year. A team is only a team when each person does their part on the team. You never see a football team on the sidelines or on the field, and some players are in the stands looking down as the game's going on. That doesn't happen. We all have a part to play.
So this thinking is definitely different. It's not culturally, what do we want to say? It's normal or abnormal. I think this is the normal part, is like what we can contribute to the church rather than what I can get out of the church. Yeah.
And the whole idea of being a team, I don't know if you've heard this little analogy, but TEAM, together each accomplishes more when you work together as a team. Joe, today we have people, I mean, they go to Riverbend for 3 months, 6 months, then they come over to Calvary Baptist for 6 months, then they're at Ebenezer Bible Fellowship. It's like checkers for some people. And sometimes they say, well, I want to go here because I like the children's program. I go over here because of the youth group. And some literally put their kids in a youth group here, children over here, but the adults, they want to go somewhere else. When is it time to move on? What would you counsel people?
Yeah, I think when you look at the idea of moving on, I think one of the most important things to recognize is, first of all, making sure you have the right view and perspective of what the church is. This is why this conversation is so key. So if you don't have that wiring of understanding or hardwired within you to understand what the church is, and even what you said before, there is no perfect church. I think if you don't understand that, then you're going to leave and be very disappointed because you're going to come across other churches that are imperfect. At the same time, I think sometimes the time to move on really comes when you no longer can be fully vested in the vision of what's happening. And what that can look like is you want the pastor or the church to be something that God has not intended it to be. And when that happens, I think it's time to really evaluate, hey, can I get behind this? And that doesn't mean it has to be mean-spirited. That doesn't mean it has to be ill will. We know very clearly through Scripture that there are times people moved on, Paul and Barnabas, right? The move of God still happened through both of their ministries. Yes, they reconciled, but at the end of the day, there was this moving on that allowed the mission to move forward. But their heart and their spirit within it, the inner attitude is really important. So if you can't get behind the vision and the mission that's unique to that church, and you're trying to make the pastors or the leadership or others be something that God's not asked them to be, it's time to move on.
And part of that moving on, and we would say this too, is not to move out of church, period.
That's right.
It's finding another fellowship that you can identify with that vision and purpose.
That's right.
It's not satisfactory to say, okay, well, I'm moving on by not going to a church ever again. We see people. So I mentioned about consumerism because that's just so much around of us, what I can get out of it and get out of it. The Pew Research came out with a recent study, which was really fascinating. Some of the top responses for people, reasons for choosing a church. And one of those is 83% is the quality of sermons. 79% is feeling welcomed by leaders. 74% the style of services. And the list goes on, and a lot of us have talked about that. So really the question is, when we're talking about the consumerism, how do we get feedback without encouraging this consumerism, or looking at it through the lens of some of these things of what people are looking at? Or are those really valid reasons, that people should be looking at why they're selecting a church?
I think part of it is really being able to ask the right type of question that lends itself to the opportunity for helpful dialogue. And also evaluating prayerfully, hey, is this person that I'm going to have these conversations with, are they mature enough to handle this type of conversation? Because not everybody, and I don't mean this in a slight towards anybody, but oftentimes not everybody's at the same place spiritually to enter to some of these dialogues. Now, that doesn't mean we can't learn, even if they're not mature enough, right? We want to be humble in our posture. But I think it's about the question of it and how we go about it and who we go to with it. And also making sure we're not trying to get something from them that Jesus ultimately wants to give us, which is validation. I think sometimes we walk this tension. We want to stay humble and teachable because we believe in continuous improvement. I don't know a pastor that would say, hey, we're good. We've got it all figured out. It's great. No, usually the lead pastor in particular is fully aware of the gaps. Amen. They see them. It's what drives them crazy. Amen. So I think it's about those types of things.
Amen. Well, we're going to take a little break again, but we'll be right back. So don't go away. We've got more to talk about and what you look for in a church. Welcome back to today's News and Biblical Views. My co-host, Rob Fields, and I are interviewing Pastor Joe Velarde. He is the lead pastor at Riverbend Church here in the Lehigh Valley, and we're talking about what to look for in a church. Joe, thank you so much for your heart for the Lord, and your enthusiasm, even your smile, really communicates the presence of Jesus in your life. How can you get feedback, and how can you give feedback without really dehumanizing someone?
Yeah, one of the greatest challenges right now in our day and age is that we have lost sight of the imago Dei of each person that we're talking to, the image bearing of others. So we're so used to giving feedback like on social media that sometimes what we do is we disconnect what I'm saying and we think that the way we're approaching somebody doesn't have ramifications to go towards their character. And so what I would really strongly encourage, instead of saying, hey, I can tell that you didn't study the scripture this week, or hey, this wasn't a deep sermon, or hey, you're not doing enough work. These are all speaking to character issues. It's questioning the work ethic, it's questioning relatability at times. You're not friendly enough, you're not humble enough, all these things, you're uncaring, and a lot of that is subjective. And so if we can get to the point where we recognize, hey, in order to help this person be the best version of themselves, I want to believe not only the best about them, but I want to come and honor them and say, hey, I love this part of what you're doing. This is so good. Here's just an idea, an observation that I wanted to share with you. And I wanted to bring it to you just as a way of saying, not only am I for you, but ways in which I think we could make this better. And recently I had that happen in a couple different times. One was someone said about just our teaching team, they said, hey, I love our communicators, they're doing a great job. But we want to be careful not to assume that everybody has a biblical understanding with some of our word choices, or if we're going to use certain words, let's unpack those words. Mm-hmm. That's really helpful. Like when we say the word gospel, that's a great word, but most people don't know what that means, if they haven't been, unless they've been brought up in the church. And even if they have, they may have a different definition than what the scriptures say. Or someone was working with us on a improvement project and for the building, and they're more process oriented than I am. And their feedback wasn't to criticize what I've done or what we've done, but to enhance. Hey, how can these processes improve? And I'm willing to join in and be a part of that solution. And that's what they're doing. Because I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses. And being over processes, that's not my strength. But vision and allowing others to join in. So I think making sure that we honor and we're honest in humility and love, and then also being able to say, hey, I'm here to help. Yeah. I'm here to help as well.
And if people see honesty and humility in you, that says it all.
Yeah, and that's great advice, approaching leadership and back and forth, even people in the congregation too. So, we're all about maintaining unity at all cost in the body and not to encourage disunity. That's one of the things we saw that early on in the New Testament churches, they're unified. There were some struggles. But again, here, when you start looking at some of the statistics out there about why people leave the church, and not to break the unity on it. Some people leave the church because they get out of the habit. We see that they left after they graduated from high school. As soon as they move into their college life and they're questioning things, they decided they didn't like the institutional church. And a big one I've seen at times is people are hurt by the church. So, Joe, what would you say? How, as people are leaving, and not to be disunit, or to create a division, but to be part of the unit, how do we protect that unity?
I think it's so important to remember the words of Jesus in John 17. He prayed for us. He prayed that we would have this unity that would reveal that he actually was truly God's son, right? And so we need to be a prayerful people in that way. So am I praying for the unity? Am I praying for it regularly? And am I the answer to that prayer? So that's part one of it. Part two is, I think, making sure that we're looking at the right game plan. So whenever there's disunity, oftentimes it's experiences and expectations that are unmet, right? And so when we're not clear on our plan or the play, for back to that team analogy, we will get off track and we settle and get caught up in lesser things. So whether that's missing the great commandment of love God, love people, that leads to the great commission of making disciples, reaching people who make disciples, who reach people and make disciples. So get back on track on those things.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, there's so much that we could have talked. We just kind of scratched the surface on this, that's for sure. But it was definitely a pleasure to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much, Pastor Joe and Pastor Larry, for this great discussion. Can I leave you with two things from our conversation today? First, it really is our desire and hope that you know this one named Jesus. And I remember a conversation with a lady who was given tours in the State House down in Delaware. And I said, would you tell me what you know about this one called Jesus? I asked her. And her response was, he's a man who was wrongly accused and executed. And we, in fact, even talked about him in one of our classes. So my question is, have you investigated who is Jesus? Are you taking the remarks of your professor or another who pictures him as just another religious leader? You know, Jesus lived a life unlike any other person. He worked miracles that validated he was sent from God. He taught lessons that changed people, in fact, even the world. He gave his life on the cross in order for you and for me to have eternal life. And he offers forgiveness of our wrongdoing when we embrace him in his work by faith. It's not enough for you just to know this, but will you trust, will you commit and give your life to him? So do you know Jesus as Christ? This is a personal matter, and you have to make that choice yourself. Then you move from a personal matter to being part of a community, the church. And this is where the church fellowship comes a part of your life. And what better place to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus, but with those who are also part of his family. And church is a place where we come together to show our love for each other, which demonstrates we're his followers. A fellowship of believers gives us a time to exalt his name in song, hymns, and music. This becomes a time for us to exercise the spiritual gifts given to us by God. Jesus brought together a little group to be with him and learn about him. Thank you so much for being with us on today's News and Biblical Views.